What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me my two great co-hosts, Fede Perez and Ralph Hanna. And guys, here we are, second week of February already, the shortest month of the year, but there's already a lot of action to really jam-pack it into this year because obviously we're right in the heat of the U20 championship. Paraguay are still alive. We'll talk about how they're doing, what has impressed you, what hasn't impressed you, because it's really been such a roller coaster of a couple of weeks over there in Venezuela. We'll also talk about what's been going on in the Copa Libertadores as the first Paraguayan team that had to participate in the tournament went into action. We'll also talk about what's been going on also in the local league, really heating up right now with some teams really impressing at the minute. But let's go to Fede real quick because, well, we got to go to the U20 one because I feel like that's the one that everyone's kind of really focused on. Again, yeah, we have things going on in the locally, we have things going on with players abroad, but really you feel like all the attention's going on in what's happening in Venezuela, especially with everything going on with the manager, with how the results have happened, and just kind of this inconsistency. I have to say it, we have to admit it, it is inconsistency because they haven't been perfect, but they're still in it. They're still in it. And we'll talk about the game that we saw last night, but man, they're really giving you that feeling of winning a lo Paraguay, as we say, winning it in the last minute, getting these like last minute results, or even trying to disappoint you at some point. But Paraguay's still alive with a chance to qualify for their first U20 World Cup in 12 years.
We're still in it, Roberto. We're still in it, Ralph. We're still in it, everybody. Yeah, hi to everyone listening to Guarani Vision. Great to be back for another episode. And yeah, I got mixed emotions. I went through so many things this week, between Libertadores happening for Nacional. Also, that was a roller coaster one, the way it ended up. Also, very angry about that one. Definitely got to talk about that situation. And with this Albert Roja, the same thing, right? It's just been up and down all the time. I mean, good games, bad games, Dusher coming out, Antolina Alcaraz taking over, totally different kind of game style, and the players having definitely problems with that situation, right? I mean, handling the ball, trying to be deeper in field. I mean, we haven't been that attacking, but fortunately, we were able to beat Chile in this last game. I'm really happy about that, about the result for the guys, for us to keep on building something in this tournament. I do think eventually we're gonna have to look back and see, did we pick the right players? Did we did everything correctly for this under 20? We definitely got to look into that situation as we're still trying to fight for a World Cup spot. I do think we're gonna get it, Roberto, just because for certain teams it kind of turned around, right? Uruguay were sitting back in their chair in the group stage, and now look at them, right? They're against the ropes, and we're eventually going to face them also this upcoming week. So we got to talk about the games that happened, the ones that are coming up, to see if everything just wraps up the way we expect it to wrap up for this under 20.
Yeah, it's really been open, Robin. We'll get to that game. We'll get to that tournament in a minute. We'll start with you on that conversation, but we do have to mention as well that there is another Paraguayan that's heading to MLS, and that's Gilberto Flores. He's officially announced, so he'll be joining Miggy as kind of the new signings over there at MLS for 2025. He'll be joining FC Cincinnati again. Another one of these players that came from this kind of same base, the youth team. He was in the team that won the Pre-Olímpico last year. He was at the Olympic team as well in Paris. So you feel like doing well in these type of competitions, and of course doing well for your club gets you these type of moves. I'm sure there's some players out there that, I'm looking at someone like Komet, for example. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of teams looking at him now that really want to get him, really want to get him on their team. And I think, doing well in these type of competitions gives you that kind of prestige and that level of importance that maybe you couldn't have got if you were performing badly.
Yeah, that's right. Hi guys, hi everybody watching, listening. It's a good move for Gilberto Flores, but because it's a player that, because being at Libertad, sometimes it's hard to break through into that first team. So he was on loan to Trinidense last year, but that Trinidense playing time minutes combined with what he was doing at the Pre-Olímpico and the Olympics themselves, that kind of gave, I think, scouts that knowledge that okay, maybe he is ready to up his level and do something different. And he's a player that's been at times very important. He was for a captain for a lot of that time, coming up through the youth teams, really a leader there. And it's the first time I think FC Cincinnati have ever signed a Paraguayan player. So that's pretty cool for people over there in Ohio that they get to see a Paraguayan, and we get one more player to follow in the league, which is very cool. And then just back to your point, Roberto, about yes, thinking about the signings and that kind of thing. where it all really starts for me is the under-17s. So we should just mention quickly that the under-17s are playing between March and April in Colombia. Their Sudamericano, which was announced this week with the groups decided. And so then there's a lot of excitement around that group, of course, because that comes from the under-15s kids that won their Sudamericano. So there's now, I'm sure, a lot of people looking at that, and what they'll do is follow their progress until they get to senior level and start playing these under-20s tournaments, and then that might be the time a lot of clubs swoop in.
Yeah, just looking at that group actually for the tournament in Colombia, they actually are grouped in with the host. They're grouped in with Argentina, with Chile, and with Peru. So obviously a very tough group, but it's also a one that if you look at the way that the format works, it kind of favors them in a way because it looks like 7 teams go to the World Cup. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens here. We'll get to that, of course, when we get to it in a couple of months, but yeah, let's focus on what we saw in the U20 because it's, Ralph, I think it's been kind of a roller coaster because the last time that we spoke, we obviously saw them qualify, finished in second, only tied with Uruguay. So this is the same team that, despite beating them 6-0, they ended up tying with the same amount of points. 3 wins, 0 draws, and 1 loss. The only difference was the goal difference, but which makes sense. That being said, going into this next group in this kind of final stage where again it's interesting to see how this all works because Chile are in there as well and they're host. So the way that the format would work right now, and we're talking off the win of 1 loss and 1 win for Paraguay, they would be in it for the World Cup. Uruguay would be the one missing out because of the team not having any points. But it's been a wild roller coaster. We're talking off a 4-0 loss to Colombia. Villarreal with the hat trick. He's been really having a really good tournament over there in Venezuela. And then it turns around yesterday with the win against Chile in the last minute, again, becoming one of those star players for them. You remember him scoring the first goal for Paraguay. Now he's scoring the latest goal for Paraguay. So it's been quite a really good tournament for him. But yeah, this has been a really inconsistent team to say the least. I mean, yeah, obviously people are going to feel happy about the performance yesterday because they got the win, and that's what matters in these type of tournaments to qualify. But you look at the performances that they've been doing, you fear of like, okay, can this be done against, they have Brazil coming up on Monday, and then they got to face Uruguay, who haven't won, and then they finish it off with Argentina, who are doing really, really well in this entire tournament. You think to yourself, can they do it? Can they get to the finish line and qualify for the World Cup?
Well, they're in with a chance only because of yesterday's game against Chile, which I guess in a way we can focus on looking also in contrast to what they did against Colombia. So I think one thing Antolin has done very well is he's quite pragmatic in contrast to Dusha, right? That Dusha wanted to play his own way and everything. But I think he learned a couple of things in that game against Colombia, which was he has to set his team just a little bit deeper. They can't, he doesn't have the kind of technical quality to try and battle out in these transitions. So they sat much deeper. They let Chile's center backs have the ball, and then they're trying to set these traps in midfield and then win back and get quick breaks from there. And so they ended up the game with like 30%, 35% possession or something, which we saw in the previous games when they also won against Venezuela and Chile. So he set back to that style, but also it was very interesting. I thought that what he didn't do is play Komet from the start, which for me is a huge temptation. He's been so good, but I think what Antolin Alcaraz likes about Octavio Alfonso has kind of been in his role is Alfonso's more likely to try and get into the box and do things, whereas Komet's gonna play in that like half space just outside of the box. And if we look at the first goal, that comes from Octavio Alfonso's running, right? Aguayo plays the pass to him, and he's right down near the touchline in the box, Alfonso, and he manages to sort of work his way back and find the angle to shoot and score. And you think, well, that's a kind of goal that he would have scored. Let's just mention quickly, how did that come about? That came about when Chile were actually complaining about a penalty the other end, which to me, I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of surprised it wasn't given. I mean, it definitely hits the elbow of the player. And so it's just that whole interpretation of natural position, unnatural position, right? But the fact that from the very same counterattack it goes to a Paraguay goal, I think was very difficult for Chile to take. And then going back to Komet, who does come on and ends up scoring the winner in the most unlikely fashion. I mean, he's not the kind of guy you think is going to score a header to win a game. and it comes because of the goalkeeper error, of course. It was a weak header. Chile's goalkeeper kind of flaps at it and it goes in. But another player to mention who's with him, who's he combining with? He finds Aguayo on the byline. It's Aguayo that crosses it in. So what we're seeing from Gabriel Aguayo, the Cerro player who does have a lot of senior experience, he's starting to grow into this tournament. I felt the first 2-3 games, he didn't really look like himself. And there's rumors that maybe, people are interested in him. Even in the Premier League, I think there was at one point a rumor. Now that transfer window's closed, I think he knows he's at Cerro for the next 6 months. So he's back and he's really playing to his full potential. And I'll pass it over to Fede because there's someone else I think we need to talk about, which is also Paraguay's goalkeeper, Facundo Insfram.
Yeah, definitely. He had quite a night, right? And just the way the game ended itself, right? I mean, we even got down to that last free kick that Chile had, and they had that last opportunity, and it was that way pretty much from Octavio Alfonso's goal. And because with Antolino Alcaraz, just like Raf is saying, we're defending a lot more. We're just giving them the ball. We're not having that firm structure that we need in the midfield. And you're definitely seeing that, this team, the guys, the players, they came into this tournament with a script, with a former manager, and now they're trying to play totally different. But I think that they feel way more comfortable the way that they're playing now. It's just the thing, they chose players to play differently. I mean, I think Du should try to play more by the sides. That was the way that they were going to try to build football in this team. And now I believe, this new coach is telling, for instance, Diego Leon, don't get yourself out there the whole time, because we've seen him struggle defensively. He's had problems, right? But I don't want to get away from what Ralph was saying. The big hero to me was Facundo Fran. He's been showing this kind of level, I believe, since under 15. He did it with the under 17, and now we're seeing it with the under 20. I think he's going to be also Olympia's goalkeeper for the upcoming Libertadores. The under 20 that will be played, I believe, also in Paraguay, that was announced this week. That's huge for us. Facundo Fran is just growing and growing. He's one of those young goalkeepers that just looks ready. And how different does it look right now, right? I mean, we're looking at so many young goalkeepers out there that are really standing out this week. There was a lot of talk about Orlando Gil also and what he's doing with San Lorenzo in Argentina. We're seeing a lot more in first division in our country, also in the local league. A lot of Paraguayans, a lot of young Paraguayan goalkeepers. For instance, Libertad. Also, we saw him having his debut last year with the Roja in Copa America. He didn't get another chance, but he's the starting goalkeeper now for Libertad, who are one of the teams that are going to fight the Apertura. But going back to this under 20, Facundo Fran, Gabriel Aguayo looked great out there. Also, Axel Balbuena has been one of the leaders in this defense constantly. I want to see more from Diego Leon, but I understand how the team is trying to play now, more on the counter attack, and maybe he's gonna get his opportunities as the tournament starts to close, right? As everything starts to build up into maybe taking more risk in certain games where you're gonna have to try to take points. It looked messy. Those last minutes against Chile. I mean, it could have gone either way. If we're talking that Facundo Fran had a fantastic game and he was so important for this win, is because they attacked way too much, and that's something that we need to figure out, because I don't know how we're going to stop this Brazil team that's just been growing and growing constantly in this tournament, and they're looking like they're on a winning run totally right now, and they're going to go to the World Cup. Hopefully we get them relaxed. Hopefully we get an Argentina that's also kind of relaxed in these next games, and we can take advantage of that and growing up into the team that this new coach wants, Roberto.
Yeah, I mean, job's not done. I mean, we're not gonna say anything. I mean, obviously we have our optimism that they could do it, and rightly so after the win against Chile. I'm sure the team's already full of optimism and the way that they do it. They don't give up. I think that's one of the things that I've been impressed by them, is that they haven't gave up. They haven't given up in any sort of these kind of games. So obviously a big test with Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina coming up, and we have to wait and see if they can do it. We have to see if Alcaraz is able to really, gel this team moving forward, because I think the only way that they're going to do it is if getting these type of results and winning in the way they have to. Sometimes you have these type of ugly games, Ralph, where at that point you don't know how it's going to be done, but as long as they're able to get those 3 points and they qualify, then they can focus on whatever has to happen in the U20 World Cup.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to talk about the sort of mental side of this team and really the resilience that they've shown going through. Just imagine from the players' side, all of these issues that they've had, right? Because of what was going on with Dusha and Antolin coming in, because it was a team that was really thrown together with a lot of the Argentinian-based players that hadn't been in the process before, they wouldn't have known each other. So you had to try and build that team very quickly. And then even we didn't even mention, right, that two players were missing in this game because they both got sent off against Colombia, including the captain Lucas Quintana. So there's been so many kind of hurdles for them to get over, and they have been managing just kind of step by step to do it. And maybe that's also a testament to someone like Antolin Alcaraz. I mean, we don't have time to go into his whole career and his whole life, but I mean, this is a guy that was working as a builder in Argentina, like before he really got his big break in football. I mean, he wasn't sure he was going to become a professional player. He had to go through that. So when he's the age of some of these kids, he wasn't in this privileged position of being in a national team by any chance. And then he gets his big break. He ends up in Belgium, and then the rest is history. And of course, he scores that goal for Paraguay against the defending world champions in South Africa, which kind of, I suppose, then starts to cement his career, and then he goes on to Premier League football. But maybe that kind of lived experience from Alcaraz is helping this team in some of that overcoming and that emotional part, the psychological part, which is also something, by the way, that Gustavo Alfaro is huge on, right? I think Fede was the person that picked up on it first when we hired him, about how he has his sports psychologist. And Alfaro has been around. He's in Brazil this week, but he's heading back to Venezuela for the final games. And so all of this, I think, is also helping to improve a dressing room that really could have just fallen apart after everything that happened.
Let me pick up on that, because Gustavo Alfaro, man, this guy is the man. Forget about everybody else that went through this job. I mean, he's doing things differently, guys. Going to see the players when he could be on vacations, but he could be out there with his family on the beach. No, he's here watching Paraguayan local football from the beginning, from the first game, from the Supercopa, the first game of the year. He was already there watching it on the stands. And then he went, just like Ralph is saying, he went to Venezuela to kick it there with the guys, try to pick them up after everything that happened with Dusher. He's now going through Brazil, seeing players. He already saw our captain, Gustavo Gomez. So he's on top of everything. I mean, you got to give it to him, Roberto. There's not a single thing that gets away from Gustavo Alfaro. And if this team picks up, it's because Antolin Alcaraz is opening the door for Gustavo Alfaro to come into this locker room and also talk with most of these players. I mean, I think that's also is something that's happened during this tournament. I mean, it's not just Antolin Alcaraz. The whole family had to come together to pick up these players, and because we had some pretty hard games. I mean, Colombia, Uruguay, it wasn't easy for these guys after.
No, and going back on your point with Alfaro, yeah, that's kind of the meticulous way. That's kind of the way that he is anyway. So we're not, it's not surprising at the same time as well. Like, he knows a lot of things inside out. So I feel like for him to do that, and it shows how really passionate he is for the job, and how much he cares about these young players, because obviously these are the players that, if they get the chance to do it, then they'll come to the senior team next year, like you said, sorry, next month. And like you said as well, you got those goalkeepers that you mentioned. Yeah, obviously you have Gatito, who's, obviously been so good in this campaign, but he's not getting any younger anyway. So you look at what someone like Israel is doing, or Orlando Gil did at San Lorenzo. So you kind of look at these options and you're like, okay, what can we work with? So yeah, again, it's all kind of working in that process. So we have to see them hopefully close it out really well. Again, these next 3 games with Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina are going to be tough. Obviously, Uruguay had their their advantage in the first group stage of the game, so hopefully they can get their revenge in the next one. And yeah, we can talk about Paraguay qualifying to the U20 World Cup. So we'll have to wait and see. Another team that hopefully is really looking to turn their fortunes ahead is Nacional. We got to talk about Nacional because it's been a wild week for them too. They had a really poor result in the local league. Obviously, they had Victor Renai leave. In comes in Pedro Saravia, and they had a big game against Alianza Lima happening over there in our senior at their Senorico, and obviously it went well for them at the beginning, Ralph. They got their first goal in the 7th minute, Gustavo Caballero getting the goal. but then it was a last-minute penalty for Alianza Lima, and Hernan Barcos, one of the more important players in Alianza Lima's history, scoring the goal in the last second, the last play of the game. And now they gotta go all the way to Lima to hope that they can turn it around and advance to the next stage.
Yeah, it's a really strange game to talk about. I mean, the result on balance is a fair result, but the way Alianza Lima got it was not fair at all. It was just never a penalty. I mean, I don't know. You have VAR and you have these things, and it's clearly a dive. And so for that to happen in the 99th minute, I think it was, by the time the penalty goes in, feels very unfair. But it's true that on balance in the game, Nacional, it was a classic Pedro Saravia game, right? They scored very early on, and then they tried to close up shop, and they relied quite a bit on Rojas, the goalkeeper, to keep them in it. He made some really good saves. I remember one he makes in the first half from Paulo Guerrero, who's playing for Alianza Lima. Brilliant save. I mean, it was very interesting to see the technique of someone like Guerrero, who's obviously very old now, not very athletic, but he still has that quality and the technique to hit the volley, and really it forced such a good save. And so in terms of the game as a whole, it was a bit like, actually, it reminds me a bit of Paraguay-Chile that we just talked about, because Paraguay sat back and let Chile equalize in the end. It was a bit the same from Nacional. It's like you're kind of playing with fire, but it's also the only way you knew Saravia was going to set up this game. But very unfair that the way it does end with that penalty. Just a note on Gustavo Caballero. We're talking about someone like Gilberto Flores, who's just made a move for doing well in the Olympics. Caballero was always on the fringe. He was in the Olympic team. He was out, and then he was in again because of injuries and things. He ended up playing, I think he ended up playing in 3 of the games coming off the bench. But he's a player that he finished the season really well, and he started the season really well in Nacional. And I think Nacional know he's going somewhere, because I've heard that Saravia is interested in someone like Richard Prieto to fill in on the left wing. And because Caballero can play on both wings, so he plays on the left or the right, is just a very useful player, I think, for teams to have. So this might be his last, or one of his last games he ends up playing with Nacional, because he's doing so well. And he's at that age where he really needs to make a jump. I think he's now 23 or 22, 23. So he really needs to kind of make that jump now for the team. And then for Nacional, what they're really missing, I think, is Thiago Caballero, who's at the under-20s with Paraguay, because they need that big strike, even though he's young, but he's that physical, good presence up front to have there. So they're gonna have to go to Lima. It's going to be hard, I think, to try and find that result. But if any team can do it, it's like a Pedro Saravia team that can set himself up well and just try and catch a goal. Remember, Saravia, who's come in for Benai, he was managing Emiliano last year, when we talked about them a lot on the podcast of how well they were doing in the Copa Sudamericana, and some famous away victories they ended up having, like in Venezuela and even in Brazil. So maybe he can just sprinkle some of that magic and they can get through. But yeah, definitely, for me, it's a fair result on balance of the game, but it's a totally unfair way it comes through that penalty.
It's totally unfair, Raf. I can't believe the way the game ended on the last play. It was just, you had to get that last ball out of there, and it was over. It was a huge win for a historical night for Nacional fans. Let's not forget about that. It was the first international Libertadores game, men's Libertadores in this case, because there was other tournaments being played there before. Building up into this situation, Nacional wanted to play at their stadium. They don't have that many fans in the stands. You saw it at this home game against a team like Alianza Lima. But Pedro Saravia, he had 2 practices, I believe, with the guys, and then he had to put them out there for their first huge game in this Libertadores. They played 3 games this year. They tied against Los de Mayo, and then they lost against Libertad. They lost against Cerro Porteño. Bernay was out. Pedro Saravia took over. And you knew right away when you heard Pedro Saravia is going to be their coach, he's going to change it up. He's going to try to put somebody up there to try to see if he can do something against Zambrano, and that defense that Alianza Lima has is a very strong defense. Paulo Guerrero, so many players with history, right? In Peru, in Europe. So you got to give it to Alianza Lima. They really got ready for this Libertadores and the way they hired. And I don't think Nacional did that. I mean, they don't have players in certain spots. And Sarabia right away took that into notice. He asked for a couple of forwards, and he just had to put out there Diego Duarte, Gustavo Caballero, a very young team. So it was up to probably Orlando Gaona to make the difference. And when he's not 100%, he doesn't make the difference. But he was about 80%, I would say, that night. And at the beginning, he really took it on and was able to put the ball in there for the 1-0. And then it was just all Alianza Lima, and you were hoping for Santiago Rojas, Kili Rojas, that put them into last year, let's not forget, into the final of Copa Paraguay. This team got to the latter stages because of him, because he really held up the team, and he's been spectacular lately. He's even been asking different interviews to get a spot back in the national team, and he was on the radar of several teams to get out of the country, but he ended up being here in Nacional, and he was so important in this tie. I don't want to lose my hope on this team. I do think they can still turn it around. Alianza Lima thought that they were just gonna run through Nacional, and it wasn't that way. I think Nacional really closed up the spaces in this game. So I'm really looking forward to what could happen next week, Roberto. I still believe in this team. I think it could end up in penalties, and I want to see Nacional against Boca. There's a lot of money at stake. That would be a huge game if it gets played here in Paraguay. So there's a lot of people looking forward, and I would even say a lot of people rooting for Nacional to get on in this Libertadores.
The huge financial advantage that Nacional could go for, as you mentioned, Fede. But Ralph, do you see them turning around over there in Lima?
Tough. I was looking, I mean, we haven't mentioned as well, Gorosito was the manager of Alianza Lima, so he returns to Paraguay, where he, of course, won the league with Olimpia in the crazy pandemic season where it was like playoffs and things. And I did notice, like, had they ever faced each other? And at the time, it was when Sarabia was manager of 12 de Octubre, and of course, Olimpia came out on top. But that was a team with people like, Ramon Sosa, Brian Ojeda, that ended up in England, so in Nottingham Forest, actually, both of them. So it was a different quality with the 12 de Octubre that he had. And I thought, wow, here he's finally getting his revenge on Gorosito with the 1-0, but it wasn't to be. Do I think they can do it? I think we're going to get something very similar. It will be like 0-0, 1-1, or 1-0 to either team. I think that's the way the game will probably end up. Yeah, I think, you know what? I think maybe Nacional can do it because remember, of course, Alianza Lima's history in Copa Libertadores. They've always been a team that struggled in the Libertadores for whatever reason, whereas Nacional have that famous run to the final 2014, and they're a team that's always kind of managed to battle through in the underdog situation, and what Sarabia did with Emiliano. So, okay, I'll give it to Nacional, probably on penalties as well, because it's going to be hard to win out there in Lima.
They're going to have to really, have to park a bus or something to try to get that result. But yeah, I agree. I think I have this feeling of what we saw a couple days ago was kind of an accident just because of that penalty. But I think they can do it. I genuinely think they can have the chance to qualify. And again, set up that big game against Boca. Wow. I mean, that would be huge for them. And, again, I feel like for them, it would be a big test. I mean, I'm not, obviously, we're thinking really ahead into the future, but, Nacional against Boca really is the David versus Goliath fixture.
And I want justice because Nacional should have won this first game, and hopefully they get that justice done over there in Lima. They're gonna get the party ready because it's probably gonna be their first big game. I believe they haven't played it yet in the Peruvian league. It's just starting out this weekend, I believe. And they have Paulo Guerrero. They have so many legends in this team, so the stands are gonna go crazy. There's gonna be the stadium's gonna be packed, and I believe Paraguayans love that kind of situation. They're going to feed off of that, and they're going to put Alianza Lima very nervous. Like I saw them pretty much in that second half. They didn't know much what to do with the ball. So I think Nacional is going to be able to handle it. Pedro Sarabia has experience also in the international stage. He has another week to get his team ready. Now he sees what he's going up against with Alianza Lima, who hadn't played an official match yet. So I'm rooting for this Nacional team. Some way, somehow they got to make it happen next week so we can get that Nacional Boca. I believe that's as far as they can get in Libertadores, to be honest with you guys, because just like I said before, I don't think they got a roster. I don't think they have enough, but they have the opportunity still to hire a couple of players, right? The transfer window is still open. They might hire this week a couple of players.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to wait and see what happens. So I'm looking forward to that game. We wanted to give an update of what's been going on in the Apertura. Obviously, one of the big results, and Ralph, obviously, this has been kind of the right prediction that you got. Guarani are still perfect after 3 games. The only team with 9 points. They've been doing so well. They got the win against Los de Mayo. Cerro getting their first one of the season against Nacional, against their kind of crosstown rival, not even crosstown, like neighborhood rivals. So yeah, that's one of the few things I wanted to look at. Obviously, Olimpia getting their win as well. It's really starting to, you kind of see that kind of, like, I wouldn't say separation, but you're starting to see some of the teams that are really going to fight for this. We haven't seen any big surprises as of yet. I think we're seeing kind of the teams that are kind of going for it at this point. Like, we know obviously Olimpia and Cerro are going to be in there, so Libertad and Guarani. It feels like after 3 games, we kind of are assessing the teams that are kind of going to go for this title.
Yeah, you're slowly seeing, right, the quality is rising up the league table, and what you would expect to kind of the big four are all there. I mean, maybe the surprise is that Guarani are leading the pack, like you said, and what have they done? They've done what I did mention in the prediction. It was, could they turn those draws into wins? And I felt they could, with people like Mendieta and Ferfer and Fernandez, who just have that experience and that quality, and that's exactly what's happened. I mean, they've managed to stop tying games. They weren't losing many games last year, but they just couldn't find the quality or the difference for a win. And now they've started that. And remember that Chiquiasi has this thing that the team start to play like a habit, and it's just everything comes out of memory, and winning becomes a habit. And so he just has that ability to start getting those results, and having such a good start could be dangerous, I think, for the rest of the league. There is one thing to mention about Guarani. This was more back when they were coached by Jubero, but they did have this crazy thing where they would always do really well in the first half of the season and not so good in the second. And maybe it was because they're traditionally a smaller squad than the big teams. Maybe teams found them out, especially when they played under Jubero, who had like one very similar style. But they had a time where they kept becoming runners up in Guarani, and most famously against Cerro, right, in the last minutes of stoppage time in a game. So there is still that. I mean, I'm sure fans, as they watch, are thinking, oh, could this happen again? And then one thing to mention about Guarani is they're in a bit of limbo with their home stadium. They said goodbye to Dos Bocas. They said, we're getting it all renovated. Everything's happening. It's going to be demolished with the CONMEBOL money. We're upgrading, which is long overdue, right? They've always had issues because of where they're situated. There's like a casino one side. There's not much space to work with. But that was finally sorted out. And then on Tuesday, all of a sudden, they sent out a press release saying we're playing against Libertad this weekend in Dos Bocas. This will be the last game. So they're having a second send-off. And the reason being is they wanted to play in San Lorenzo Stadium, but San Lorenzo Stadium has not been given the okay by the national police, by the Paraguayan FA. So suddenly they're like, okay, we don't actually have a place to play right now. They're hoping that will figure itself out. But this is an ongoing problem for a lot of teams in the league, that they don't have stadiums to play in. And especially they won't have stadiums to play in against bigger clubs, because again, this week, the police said, I don't think you can use Itagua for Cerro and Olimpia games, and not even Luqueño. And what's happening this weekend in Itagua in the stadium, you're having Luqueño against Olimpia. So you're having two teams that shouldn't be playing there against each other, because two huge sets of fans. Luqueño said, we're only giving 400 tickets to Olimpia. You guys, I mean, everybody listening or watching this show knows that Olimpia has way more than 400 fans. So what's going to happen there? People are probably going to try and get into the home section. The tickets are really cheap, $2.50. I mean, the exchange rate is crazy, but $2.50 at the moment for a ticket. I mean, that place is going to be overflowing. So the whole stadium issue is not just Guarani. It's happening for for quite a few teams that they're just not finding where to go. Cerro, you mentioned, got their first win of the season. Now they're down in Encarnacion, where most people are on the beach at this time of year because it's the summer and people are enjoying. It's like it's not a seaside town because there's no sea. It's a riverside town where people enjoy and go to the beach and holiday. But they do have a very nice new stadium, so Cerro down there. But it's just this ongoing problem of teams not always finding where they can play. And so in the case of someone like Guarani, all that moving around, that might end up affecting the results compared to Libertad, Cerro, that have their home stadium set and they'll be there all season.
It's going to be the topic, no doubt about it, especially these first 6 months, the stadiums, not enough stadiums. And eventually, if you have problems, like it could happen in this Luqueño Olympia, because of what Ralph is mentioning, they might say next time you can't play here and you're going to have to look for another stadium. And as of right now, we don't have enough. That's the reality. And they got to move around. I mean, this is what a knee situation against Libertad was very curious. And with just 4 games in, guys. So it's definitely going to be a problem that's going to keep on going, especially when you don't have Defensores del Chaco available, which has been the big issue, I believe, for these upcoming games, because they're getting the stadium ready for what's going to happen for our Albert in just a couple of weeks. So yeah, this thing is just gonna keep on going as the tournament evolves, right? Because as of right now, you have Guarani and Libertad. It's a huge game this weekend because both teams are fighting for the first spots. Meanwhile, Olympia is trying to hold on to what they found in this last game, which was a very interesting midfield with Dominguez getting in there and making the difference. Cerro Porteño picking up their first 3 points also at home, so they're gonna see if they can build momentum now, taking their football, as Ralph mentioned, to Encarnacion, the carnival city, this time of the year also, because as we're starting February, it's just carnival season in those cities, and they're gonna have fun, hopefully. Cerro Porteño fans have something to celebrate after this game. To me, this is a very hard team. I believe they have Jose Arrua, which is probably the only coach that's been, or the coach that's been the longest on a first division team as of right now. This is, I think it's his 3rd year already in first division. It's been really good for him and building a really interesting team with a low budget. And when you have those kind of teams, Roberto, low budget teams that can really mess up the season for you. As of right now, you're seeing Guarani having enough. You're seeing Libertad having more than enough starting the season. But eventually, they will have the double competition. They will have Libertadores games. They will be distracted. And maybe then other teams can also catch up.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's always those kind of like underdogs that want to surprise and kind of ruin a momentum of a big team like an Olympia, like a Cerro. So that isn't out of the question. I think that the whole thing, and like you said, Ralph, it's just the quality is just way better than the rest. And again, maybe there are teams that just have off days. We've seen that before, but you fear as if though you don't see those sort of underdogs. At least we haven't seen it yet. And if they haven't reached up, then they're really trying to chase the pack. And again, I feel like what we've seen from Guarani has really been sort of a testament, like you said, Chigi Arce doing so well. And you feel like for Cerro, do they really know what they're doing even with Diego Martinez? I feel like Olympia, they should get it done as well, but you fear, can they be more consistent enough? So, Ralph, I think for my closing thoughts on all this, I think it's just the case of which team could be the most consistent, because I think that's the only way you're going to decide a league champion in this one. Because, yeah, obviously it might not be pretty the way that there is. And, there's going to be a lot of fans that are going to complain about the way that teams are playing. But ultimately, as long as they're able to get those results and win those crucial games and take advantage even of teams that are not doing well, that's how they're going to win the Apertura.
Yeah, the consistency and just finding those results like we were talking about. And we should mention with Olympia, I mean, one of the reasons they won the title last year and they found those results was clean sheets, was defense. We talked about some of the struggles because Capasso has left. Well, now they have an even bigger blow, right? With Gaston Olveiras' injury, the goalkeeper, he was voted the best player in the league last year. He's got an injury that's going to see him out for the rest of the season. So that's a really big blow for an Olympia that you thought were just turning the corner because they did win, but they're still trying to find it hard with defensively. So that's another issue for them, that they've solved some issues with Javier Dominguez, I think, in midfield, but now they've got these other issues defensively. And then with Cerro, we've already seen that it's been, like you say, they don't seem to have settled on their style. What's working at the moment is Cecilio Dominguez. I mean, I know he did miss that penalty, but he's come back now. He's scored a penalty, which was, I think, important for him and his confidence. But remember, he was one of the top players at the start of the Apertura, I wouldn't say the whole Apertura last year, before things dropped off, especially with illness, injury, and I think fitness played a part. But now he looks quite good again, and his quality is so high, similar to Rodney Redes in Olympia, that he could really become a difference maker. But I think, to your point, can it really be consistent? So as we talk about consistency and looking at the issues with Olympia and Cerro, I just go back to Guarani and you go back to Libertad, because remember, Libertad didn't make any signings. They lost a lot of players, but they've started really well with the older players. Now they lost another guy in Gilberto Flores, who we mentioned at the top of the show. They have replaced him with Thomas Gutierrez, the Venezuelan who was at Emiliano. But you still feel like they look good. I mean, they look very solid. Are they going to lose more players? For example, is Ruben Lescano leaving before the end of the transfer window? We don't know. I mean, he's obviously not going to Europe because it's closed over there, but there's still MLS. Probably Russia is still open. So remember, we've had a lot of players head there. So Argentina, Brazil still open right till the end of the month, I think. So we got to just check that they didn't lose more players. But at the moment, you're kind of thinking between Guarani and Libertad, these are looking like the more stable teams and the ones that could find that consistency.
Yeah, Fede, I mean, do you feel that way as well?
I think we're starting to see the big difference, right, between the teams that have the wallet, that have the big budget to hire a whole bunch of players, and they're trying to build that good team. But then you have other teams that didn't have that budget, and they have great coaches, just like Ralph is saying. I mean, Guarani is building up a really interesting team. They've maintained their base of players during these first 3 games, which were pretty much played every other 3 days, and that speaks very well, right? I had my doubts about Willy Mendieta, and he played these 3 games because of how much game time he had last season with Libertad, and he ended up being so important in these 3 games. Also, Fer starting to look really well, scoring right away and picking up just where he left off with this jersey. And that's not the only good thing. I'm seeing really young players coming out from this Guarani team and really picking up their level. That has to do with the coaching, right? I mean, he's really building those young players, and he's going to have a whole bunch even when they come back from the under 20. So it's going to be, I think, that kind of season. It's not going to be all about the experienced players. I think we could have younger teams and making the difference. Even in Cerro Porteño, I think that this new coach, he's hitting into a younger team. I also believe he's looking into the younger players that he has in Cerro Porteño to start putting them in and building that team that he needs for Libertadores, just like Olympia. But Olympia does not have the wallet. Olympia cannot hire. Libertad lost a center back, like you guys were mentioning, Gilberto Flores. They went right away and said, who's a good center back here in the local league? Okay, Tomas Gutierrez, he already playing with his national team. Bring him on. Let's bring him on a loan, so at least we have one more center back. That's the way they just figure out things. That's the way they solve things. But Olympia can't do that right now. After they lost Olveira, Gaston Olveira, such an important piece of this team in the locker room, everything he did last year. I don't know how they're going to replace that. I mean, Marino Arzamendia finally getting his opportunity after going on loan, after going to Luqueño, Resistencia. He went to get minutes in Argentina and Chacarita. Now it's his opportunity. He did the preseason with the team, but nobody thought that he was going to eventually have the starting role, or that Gaston Olveira was going to get injured. And it's been really unfortunate for Olympia because they can't hire another goalkeeper. They're going to have Libertadores. And if something happens to Marino Arzamendia, a red card or something like that, they're going to have to really put in a very young goalkeeper out there. So I want to see how they handle this situation, to be honest with you guys. Gaston Olveira was top 3 of players last year.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to kind of the drama that we're going to have heading into the next few weeks in the Apertura as we close out another great episode of Guarani Vision. For myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hanna, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.